The champagne glass felt slippery in my hand as my father stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, his smile sharp enough to cut. "Some kids make you proud," he announced to the room of relatives and neighbors, his eyes deliberately skipping over me. "Others just take up space." The laughter came in waves, my brother's bark, my aunt's nervous giggle, the neighbors' awkward chuckles. My fingers tightened around the stem until I felt the crystal begin to give, not breaking, just flexing, the way I'd been flexing my entire life. My mother studied her plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mason smirked into his wine, 18 years of being the chosen one reflected in that one expression. And me? I felt something cold and clarifying settle in my chest. Not the hot rush of anger, but something far more dangerous. Certainty. I smiled back at my father, a real smile. Good thing I just moved 3,000 miles away. The room didn't just go quiet. It went silent in a way that made people shift in their chairs, suddenly fascinated by their napkins. My father's jaw tightened, not with guilt, but with surprise that I'd dared to speak at all. "I got my own place in Seattle," I continued, my voice steady as a heartbeat. "Don't worry, you'll never have to make space for me again." I set down my glass, pushed back my chair, and walked out of that house for what I thought would be the last time. What I didn't know was that 3,000 miles wasn't nearly far enough, and that table I'd just left, I was about to build a better one and make damn sure everyone saw it. My name is Nora. I'm 29 and an electrical engineer. This is the story of how I rebuilt more than just circuits. I grew up believing love had prerequisites. In my house, affection came with terms and conditions, and somehow I never qualified for any of them. The house in Indianapolis looked like every other one on the block. 2 stories, white siding, maple trees that turned fire red every October. Inside, it operated like a monarchy with very clear succession rules. Mason was born first, loud and confident, the kind of kid who never questioned whether he belonged. I came 3 years later, quiet and curious, and from the start, I was other. His football trophies lined the hallway like religious artifacts, polished every Sunday. My robotics competition awards lived in a drawer under old user manuals. When Mason scored a touchdown, Dad would replay the footage at dinner, analyzing every move like it was the Zapruder film. When I won a state science fair, he'd nod and say, "That's nice, Nora. Don't make your brother feel bad." Small cuts delivered with smiles. Death by 1,000 dismissals. Mom wasn't cruel. She was conflict avoidant, which in our house meant the same thing. She'd fold napkins when Dad's voice rose, stir pots that didn't need stirring, whisper, "Just let it go, sweetheart." Her silence taught me that my feelings were an inconvenience, my presence an afterthought. The basement became my refuge. It smelled like solder and old electronics and possibility. While upstairs echoed with ESPN highlights and Dad's booming voice, downstairs belonged to me. I fixed broken radios, rebuilt keyboards, taught myself circuit design from library books. Machines didn't play favorites. They only cared if you understood them. My grandmother was the only one who saw me clearly. She'd visit on Saturdays with pastries and questions about whatever project cluttered my workbench. "You see things differently, Nora," she'd say, her voice soft but certain. "Don't let anyone tell you that's wrong." She said it like she knew, like she'd watched her own son build a hierarchy and chosen not to fight it, but also chose not to be silent about the damage. By 18, I'd mastered the art of being useful without being visible, Dad's preferred combination. When I got accepted to MIT on a full scholarship, he barely looked up from his newspaper. "That far away?" he muttered. "Figure it out yourself." I did. I worked nights at a campus coffee shop, saved every dollar, and built a life 3,000 miles away, where my accomplishments didn't have to apologize for existing. I used to think distance would make him see me. I was wrong. Distance just made it easier for him to forget I existed at all, until I made it impossible to ignore. The weeks after Thanksgiving passed in a strange blur. Seattle wrapped me in its gray mist like a blanket, and I threw myself into making my apartment feel permanent. Not just a place I escaped to, but a place I'd chosen. I painted the accent wall a deep blue, hung floating shelves for my books, bought a long walnut dining table that seated 8 chairs, all the same height, no head of the table. It was mid-December when I invited people over for Christmas dinner. Not because I was trying to replace my family, but because I finally understood I didn't need to. My neighbor who'd helped me move furniture. My former professor who still sent encouraging articles. A colleague who'd driven me to urgent care at 2 a.m. when I had an allergic reaction. They were a strange, wonderful mix of personalities, and when they sat at my table laughing over roasted vegetables and bad jokes, I felt something I'd never felt in Indianapolis. Belonging. My friend took photos, candid ones. Me laughing, the table glowing with candlelight, everyone's faces warm and open. She posted them to her social media with a caption, "Found family hits different." I didn't think anything of it. I certainly didn't expect my cousin Sarah to see them. Sarah followed my friend on social media and had always been quietly sympathetic to my position in the family, though she'd never said much about it directly. When she saw the post, something about it moved her. She shared it to her own page, which had thousands of followers in our hometown Indianapolis social circles, with her own caption. My cousin Nora built her own table, literally and figuratively. Sometimes the family you choose is the one that actually chooses you back. Within 48 hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times throughout Indianapolis social circles. I didn't expect it to become the talk of our hometown, but it did. The call came 3 days after Sarah's reshare while I was washing dishes, my phone buzzing with a number I hadn't seen in months. I almost didn't answer. Something, instinct, curiosity, readiness made me pick up. "The whole town is talking about you." My father's voice came through tight and controlled, the way it always did when he was furious but trying not to show it. I dried my hands slowly. "Talking about me?" "Those pictures, your little Christmas gathering. People are asking me what happened between us. Your cousin wrote some sentimental garbage about you, finally building your own table. Do you have any idea how that makes us look?" There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We miss you." Just, how does this affect my image? "I didn't post anything," I said calmly. "You didn't have to. It's everywhere. Your mother can't even go to the grocery store without someone asking what we did to drive you away." That sounds like a question you should have answered years ago. The silence that followed had weight to it. I could picture him in the kitchen, jaw working, trying to decide whether to yell or hang up. "You embarrassed us," he said finally, low and venomous. Something in me snapped, not into anger, but into absolute clarity. "Dad, you stood in front of 20 people and said I take up space. You spent my entire childhood making it clear that loving Mason was easy and tolerating me was a chore. I didn't embarrass you. I stopped pretending that's normal." I heard movement on the other end, voices in the background. My grandmother had been visiting them when I called, and she must have heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Then a different voice came on the line, older and trembling. "Nora, sweetheart." My grandmother. "I'm here, Grandma." "I saw the photos," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It looked beautiful, honey. You looked happy." "Mom, stay out of this," my father started. "No." Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp and final. "You've controlled this family long enough, and I've stayed quiet long enough. Nora built something good, something safe, and if you can't see that, you're blind." I heard my father inhale sharply, the sound of footsteps, a door closing. "He's upset," Grandma said quietly, just to me now. "He's always upset when someone doesn't follow his script." "You're right," she whispered. "You've always been right. And I'm sorry I didn't say it louder." We talked for 20 minutes after that. She told me she'd been thinking about the photos all night, about the way I looked in them, relaxed, smiling, surrounded by people who actually wanted me there. She said it made her realize how rarely she'd seen me look that way growing up. "He's going to call you back," she warned before we hung up. "He doesn't know how to let this go." "Good," I said. "Neither do I." The call came the next morning. This time his voice was different. Less rage, more calculation. "We need to fix this," he said, like we were discussing a PR crisis instead of 29 years of emotional neglect. "You need to come home for New Year's. We'll have a family dinner. Show everyone we're fine." I let the silence stretch out, long and deliberate. "No." "Nora?" I'm not coming back to that house to sit at the kids' table while you hold court. If you want to fix this, you come here, to Seattle, and we sit at my table. Same height chairs, no hierarchy, equal. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. That's ridiculous. Those are my terms. You spent 30 years making me beg for scraps of your attention. If you want a relationship now, you meet me where I am, as equals. Another long silence. Then, fine. We'll be there, New Year's Eve. He hung up before I could respond. I texted him my address later that day, along with the time to arrive. 6 p.m. sharp. I stared at my phone, heart hammering. I'd expected him to refuse. I'd expected him to dismiss me one more time. I hadn't expected him to agree. The days leading up to New Year's Eve felt surreal. I cleaned my apartment 3 times, rearranged the table twice, questioned everything. What if this was a mistake? What if he showed up just to humiliate me in my own space? But something Grandma had said stuck with me. You don't owe him comfort. You owe yourself honesty. So I cooked. Roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, the green beans with almonds my grandmother used to make. I set 3 plates at the table, perfectly spaced, no chair positioned at the head. I lit candles. I poured water into matching glasses. And when the knock came at 6 p.m. sharp, I opened the door to my parents standing in my hallway looking smaller than I remembered. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed. Dad's jaw was set in that way that meant he was holding back 100 arguments. Neither of them had ever been to Seattle before. Come in, I said. They stepped inside slowly like they were entering enemy territory. Dad's eyes swept the apartment, the bookshelves, the framed photos of friends, the table set for 3 with no head seat. He saw it. I watched him see it. His mouth tightened. Nice place, he said, the words awkward in his mouth. Thank you, dinner's ready. We sat. Mom complimented the food in a thin, nervous voice. Dad ate in silence, his fork scraping the plate with more force than necessary. I could see him trying to find something to criticize. The apartment, the meal, my life. But there was nothing. I'd built something good, and he couldn't deny it. Halfway through the meal, he finally spoke. So you're doing well for yourself. I set down my fork and looked at him directly. I am. You didn't think to tell us? You never asked, and when I tried to tell you, you changed the subject to Mason. His jaw worked. We protected Mason. He needed more support. He needed more because you gave him everything, I said quietly, and I learned to build a life where I didn't need you at all. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We never meant to make you feel less than him. Intent doesn't erase impact. I kept my voice steady, factual. Dad, you stood up at Thanksgiving and told a room full of people I take up space. You've spent my entire life acting like my existence was an inconvenience. That's not something I misunderstood. That's what happened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in my life, I watched my father struggle for words. I didn't. He stopped, started again. I didn't know how to connect with you. Mason was easy. Football, sports, things I understood. You were different. You lived in that basement doing things I couldn't follow. So you gave up. I didn't give up. I just. He exhaled hard, his shoulders sagging. I didn't try. I told myself you were fine, independent. I didn't realize I was making you feel invisible. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from him. Mom reached across the table, hesitant. Can we try? Even if it's slow? Even if we mess it up? I looked at the 2 of them. My father, who'd built his identity around one son and forgotten he had a daughter, and my mother, who'd chosen peace over protection every single time. I'm not moving back to Indianapolis, I said carefully, and I'm not going to pretend the last 29 years didn't happen. But if you want to visit, if you want to actually know me instead of the version of me that makes you comfortable, you can come here, to this table, as equals. Dad nodded once, stiff but sincere. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't absolution, but it was a start. When they left 2 hours later, Mom hugged me at the door, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on us." Dad shook my hand, awkward, formal, but his grip was firm, real. I closed the door behind them and stood in my quiet apartment, the candles still burning on the table, the city lights glowing through the windows. I hadn't just stood up for myself at that Thanksgiving dinner, I'd rewritten the rules, and for the first time in my life, my father had followed them. When New Year's morning broke over Seattle, I woke up to a text from my grandmother. "Proud of you. Always have been." I made coffee, sat at my table, the one I'd chosen, the one with equal seats, and felt something I'd been chasing my whole life: peace. Not because my family had suddenly become perfect, not because my father had transformed overnight into the dad I'd always wanted, but because I'd finally learned the difference between belonging and begging. My parents visited twice more over the next few months. Each time, they sat at my table. Each time, the conversation got a little easier. Dad started asking about my work, not out of obligation, but with genuine curiosity. Mom sent me recipes, small things, slow things. Mason never reached out, and I didn't contact him. Some relationships, I realized, weren't worth rebuilding. He'd built his identity on being the favored son, and my independence threatened that narrative. I made peace with the fact that not all family ties deserve to be maintained. Repair doesn't happen in one dinner, but it starts with someone being brave enough to say this is how things are going to be now, and that someone was me. If you've ever had to build your own table, literally or figuratively, drop a comment below. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is create a space where you're not just tolerated, but celebrated.